today. I think this is a really important conversation that we're about to have, and so I'm really glad that that you guys are here and that we can kind of talk about what it means to be a neighbor and how to think about and move into neighborhoods well. Wanted to let you know tomorrow, Mark was slotted to speak on negotiations, but his shoulder is getting tapped for jury duty. Wah, wah, wah. So we will have Crystal White speaking on negotiations tomorrow. Okay, so without further ado, we have Phil Kirk and Silva Zhang with us. Silva, I'm saying your last name right, right? Yeah, close enough. All right. Um, okay, before we really dive in, I know you guys just gave your quick intro, but can you tell us briefly, like, who you are, how you got into real estate, and maybe the neighborhoods that you've lived in since being in Indy? Is that good? Silva, I'm gonna have you go first, although I think maybe only one neighborhood for you.
Yeah, so we moved to Indy in 2015. I grew up, you can probably hear kids in the background, just so you know, they're leaving soon. We moved to Indy in 2015 for residency for my husband. Had grown up in Bloomington, so knew Indy somewhat familiarly, but not really. I think I had a lot of misconceptions, / it was a very different city when I was growing up. But we love Ransom Place so much that we, when we got too big for our house, moved a block over. It's just like 3 blocks by 2 blocks. So that's the only place that I've lived in Indianapolis.
Silva, Phil, what about you?
I grew up in Carmel and have bounced around central Indiana all through college. So I went to IUPUI. So I lived in Fall Creek Place, then Ransom Place, which is awesome. And then Windsor Park, Meridian Kessler. And then Mapleton, Fall Creek, and now Kennedy. A little bit of everywhere between 2009 to 2021.
Perfect. Phil, I believe you were the one who you were the impetus of this session, and then we kind of all got together and started it. Am I thinking of that right?
I think it might have been Silva, but I have no idea.
All right, well then,
I'll take the
never
credit
mind.
though. That's fine.
I guess from the two of you, I would like to know, like, why does this conversation feel important to you? Like, why? I know I asked you to do this topic, but I think this is something that resonates pretty deeply with both of you. So, can you talk about why that's important? Phil, you first.
Yeah, I would say it seems important because I feel like as licensed real estate brokers, we kind of like there's kind of like a veil that gets lifted within your first few years of being an agent where you just kind of like you literally can't avoid seeing kind of the underbelly of some things that go on. You see a lot of good things that happen, but you also um especially if you work downtown, I would say, even if you don't, probably you kind of can't turn a blind eye anymore to neighborhoods and the complexities that they face, and even um, just some of the challenges of development or revitalization, or all these kinds of words that have very positive meanings but can mean very different things depending on who you're talking to. Um, so it seems pretty important. I feel like agents especially have kind of a social responsibility to dive into these conversations and understand what their roles and responsibilities are. Um, that's kind of what I would say. I feel like when I started, it was like within my first year, I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is really complicated. um, and we kind of have like, I mean, on the one hand, we're just facilitating everything, but we kind of have a lot of power to influence people in positive ways. And so understanding that and educating ourselves is really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Silva? anything to add there? Why does this conversation feel important to you?
Yeah, I think recognizing the power that we have to influence things in positive ways, but also the power to influence things in negative ways, and that we can do damage even when we think we have, even when we have good intentions and we think we're being helpful, that we actually can be hurting people without realizing it if we don't know and understand the history of a place, the things that have happened before, the larger patterns that we're a part of that aren't just like, oh, well, if my, like, it's the kind of, if I pick a flower in the national park, like it's a flower. But if everyone comes and picks a flower, the national park is going to be a lot less pretty for everyone. And to be able to see and understand how those small actions are part of a larger pattern of behavior that could be hurtful, I think is important.
Yeah, so but can I ask you just keep going there? Like what to you, like what was your journey to figure out like how does one be a good neighbor and like kind of what does that mean to you now?
Yeah, I came in way too strong, picking lots of flowers, thinking I was making bouquets that would be great. When I moved to Ransom Place, I moved in on Pecos Street, which is a street that has had a lot of, actually not just a lot more turnover, but like was raised and rebuilt for the most part. Like it's primarily infill housing. And so there is a different feel, a different crowd, like there is a bit of a difference there between the rest of the neighborhood. And because it was my side by side neighbors that were walking their dogs on the same sidewalk, I met and connected with most of those neighbors first. So when two of them were like, hey, there's a neighborhood election coming up, we don't like the person who's running for president and we think that you should run. I was like, great, an opportunity to serve my neighborhood. Like, this is so wonderful. So I, having moved to the neighborhood like 3 months prior, ran against a Black neighbor who was fourth generation in the neighborhood and had no idea what I was doing. I just thought, like, people aren't happy with her. They feel she's divisive. I could come in and like bring people together, get things done. Like, I really care and I have time because I was taking a break, like, as we were moving to like paint the house and do some different repairs and not working. So I thought, I have all this time on my hands. I could really be helpful. And I was really hurtful. And it took years to repair the relationship with the neighbor that I ran against. That now we have a friendship and a working relationship, but like we had to actually like sit down and have a conversation and apologize to get to that point. When I really like I didn't come in with bad intentions, but I came in with ignorance that was hurtful.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Silva. Um, Phil, what about you? What's your journey been? What does being a good neighbor mean to you?
Yeah, I would say kind of similar. Like I think my um like 6 years ago, before even being an agent, like my idea of being a good neighbor was I'm going to buy this house and make it look pretty. Like it was literally like that simple. Um and I quickly like joined the neighborhood association in Mapleton Fall Creek and understood like pretty fast like this neighborhood is complicated and this neighborhood has like a history that I don't understand. And there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of hard work that's gone into it as well from people who have lived there for generations and who, are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who are serving on this board. And so I pretty quickly like had to reset my definition from like developing a place or like pursuing progress. It's not just like making a home look pretty or making homes look nice. It's really understanding like what are the hopes and dreams of the people who have lived here for a long time, both individually and collectively. Um, and that was just like a really big learning curve for me. Like I kind of jumped in and I was like, I'm gonna run for the board and do this and that. And like I lost, of course, which was like a really good thing that happened because I just wasn't listening and wasn't understanding like some of the complications um, and challenges that the neighborhood had gone through. I mean, there used to be tons of gangs in the Mapleton Fall Creek neighborhood that, I mean, really the neighborhood association deserves a lot of credit for working hard to change those things and to think for those things. And I'm just coming in like, we need a brewery, you know, it's like, like just totally ignorant to the story of the neighborhood, which is really scary for people who've lived there a long time. Like they have a culture and an identity that I was just ignorant to. And so, yeah, my entire definition has completely changed. And I feel like probably like a really simple way to define it is kind of similar to like what you say, Rosie, when you're like, oh, if I'm doing my job well, I'm making people feel like known, understood, and then like really loved. I think that's a really great definition for being a good neighbor, is like really understanding your neighbors and really loving and serving them. Um, and you have to do both, because I think if you only understand your neighbors, but you don't actually serve them and their needs, then you're kind of in a place of judgment. But if you really like serve your neighbors but don't actually understand their story, then you're just kind of being flaky and distant. It's like, oh, here's some brownies, have a good life. So you kind of like, you really need to have both, and you really need to pursue both understanding and servanthood from the perspective of like, this is an individual and this is a collective neighborhood. Like, this block of my street has experienced a history that I need to understand. And I'm talking more about like like in urban neighborhoods, I guess. I think it can be true and outside of the loop and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Phil, can you go deeper into your experience in Mapleton Fall Creek and like just share that story of what it was to, because it's a dry neighborhood. Can you get into all of that?
Yeah. So I don't know how to say this guy's last name. Will O something Osterler or something. He was like the co-founder of Angie's List. Um, Maybe he goes by Bill. I don't know. But he basically
Bill Osterly.
Osterly. I never would have gotten that. He is a great guy. From the interactions I've had with him, he had this big vision to buy the old Indiana City Bank that was at 38th Street and Washington Boulevard. And his main like desire was just like, I just want to restore this building. Like, I love 38th Street. It has such a mixed like identity depending on who you talk to, but I believe it can be this like beautiful boulevard that connects, Mapleton Fall Creek that faces downtown, and Meridian Kessler, which kind of faces Broad Ripple. So he had like this great vision for restoring this building, but part of that vision was to have tenants in there, one of which he wanted to be a restaurant. And I remember like sitting in that meeting of the neighborhood association and people just kind of losing their minds. Like, I can't believe you're trying to bring alcohol into our neighborhood. And these were folks who were, 60 years old plus, who had worked really hard to create a dry covenant for Mapleton Fall Creek. And there's some like, the boundaries of Mapleton Fall Creek are kind of confusing, but for the most part, like no restaurant, gas station, or anything can sell liquor of any kind. So like if you go into the BP at 38th and Fall Creek Parkway, unless it's been overturned, they don't like sell like Miller Lite or anything. And that was something the neighborhood association put into place to really try to get rid of some criminal activity. And I mean, people were just like, we don't want alcohol in this neighborhood. We don't want it, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like it made me realize like I really need to understand the history, because from my perspective as a millennial, I view the ability to sell alcohol in a neighborhood as a really great thing. as like, oh, we can have restaurants, we can have like a small grocery store, we can like have some amenities that would really even economically improve our neighborhood. Um, but the other side of you know, the other perspective is no, like alcohol equals gangs. Um, and so that was just a huge eye-opening experience, and you know, Bill handled it really well, and um, you know, really wanted to accommodate the neighborhood. He was like, I don't want to put something in this building that freaks people out. Um, I think the challenge there will come a day when the people hold really tightly to the belief of it staying dry will no longer be on the board. Um, so I feel like it's one of those like conflicts and tensions that everyone really needs to enter in together to make sure people are heard, because I completely understand both sides of what's going on. So it's like, how do you really honor the people who've lived there a long time while at the same time look towards the future and think well for that? So it's not easy.
Mm. Well, I guess, and I mean, we talked about this a little bit on our prep call, but like, I think from our generation, it doesn't feel like a bad thing. And like, we want to maybe see the neighborhood progress or develop or whatever. But I guess, how do you hold that tension of like, I think this is a good thing and other people think that's a bad thing? Like, is that just something that you let go of your hope for it? Is it like a weight? Is it like a, you try to more deeply understand? Like, can you just talk through like, how do you hold those two things in tension?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, especially something like that, which is just so personal to people. Um, I think like if it's a question of like, do you sit back and just let whatever happen, or do you like enter into the fight? Like I think I don't know. I think like culturally, um, like we're in a moment where like people really want to fight for what they believe in, and like if you don't agree with them, like you're just really stupid. So I think like I don't know, it's just hard because it's one of those things that's not black and white, and I'm a very like black and white kind of person. Like I really like clarity and like what's the next step? What's the next step? Um, but I think it's just one of those things where you have to come together and you have to really understand the perspective of each side, because I think the folks who lived there a long time who really wanted to fight to keep it dry don't understand that like if a restaurant was started and they sold craft beer, it's very unlikely that that would start a new like Mapleton Fall Creek gang. Like the probability of that is very low. Now the downside would be gas stations can now sell liquor. So like, is there a way to navigate that? Is there a solution of a different kind of covenant where, you can't buy something and then take it away, you know? Um, so I think it's just like the meeting itself showed to me like, one, I really don't understand the dynamics of what's going on, but two, like there hasn't been like a healthy coming to the table together and really like um sharing everyone's thoughts. It was just kind of like a yelling match. And not from Bill, like he was very sweet and understanding. But it was just clear that like, you know, it really touched a pain point for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Silva, I want to ask the same question of you, but I'm going to wait until you figure your internet stuff out. So, Phil, while we're waiting, or Silva, are you good to go?
Yeah, I'm here. I just think it's less likely to freeze if I'm not talking, if I turn the video off.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, same question for you. Can you talk about like what it is to hold those two things in tension of like, oh, I maybe I want to see my neighborhood grow, but maybe there's some tension, or your experience is a little different of like, maybe it's time for me to step back and let leaders who have been there a long time take over. Like, can you just talk about holding maybe some of your enthusiasm for the neighborhood and the history that's there? How do you hold those two things together?
Yeah, I think it's much more, not that we like that I want the neighborhood to grow or that I have like an agenda in my case, but just that like there's a degree to which the joy in celebrating the good things like have to understand the other side too. Like it's like inviting a friend who's just had a miscarriage to a baby shower and just like expecting them to be excited. Um, like if you don't understand the profound trauma and loss, Ransom Place is the last surviving piece of intact neighborhood of a vast fabric in that part of the city, which was raised and mowed under into, for the most part, parking lots. Like IUPUI and the hospital are on land that previously was like a rich heritage and like a thriving ecosystem of businesses and churches and relationships that it's like if you come in and someone's like really cranky about something and you're like, I don't know what the big deal is. Like all she said was like, put away your shoes, but it's like there's a whole backstory that you missed. I think it's more that, and to know, like for me, I now understand that to love my neighbors means wading into that with them and actually coming alongside, not coming in the front, but coming to the side or behind as we work to have conversations with IUPUI where we can actually bring people to the table to say, I think you guys are missing the hurt that's here and we need to have a conversation. So actually, like I restructured where instead of running for president, I talked to a neighbor who's fourth and her daughter fifth generation, and said, would she consider being president and I could be her vice and we could work together as a team to do some things. And I'm thinking like neighborhood cleanups, community gardens. And it turns out that the work that we had to do was actually to partner with the Peace Learning Center to do some racial reconciliation conversations, which isn't the work that I was planning to do, but it's the work that needed to be done. And so I'm now engaged in a lot of like figuring out the finances of that so that we can be the 501c3 sponsor and that, you know, they can bring in money to be able to do and have these conversations. And then also we brought on a treasurer who was also a long time in the neighborhood and had been on the board previously, but we brought her back in to have continuity. And we brought in a fourth woman who works for IUPUI, and she is now bringing, I believe it's called the Board of Governors, are having individual conversations, meeting with neighbors to hear their story, hear their hurts, hear what has happened, and be able to understand the way that IUPUI has played a role in that. And I just feel like incredibly humbled that like getting out of my own way of just like, look at these rah-rah things, and to like listen and hear that this really powerful work is happening, and getting to just be like, a part of it is so much better than if I had been trying to lead something else. And instead, like be following and listening and helping do the work is like, I'm receiving way more than I'm giving in this process. And it's really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think this is like a really important thing for us to all think about like personally. But then it's a whole nother topic when we're thinking about like, how do we educate and coach our clients to be maybe more aware as they're moving into neighborhoods. I'm curious how you do this. How do you have conversations with your clients that feel like, yeah, I don't even know how to finish that question. How do you have conversations with your clients about moving into a neighborhood well? Or do you have conversations? What does that look like? Phil.
Well, I would say like most of my kind of clients are like their thought is like, how can I revitalize this, and it's like well intentioned, but it's really kind of like, mm, you know um I tell people, like, there's two things I wrote down my first year of being a realtor, and I repeat it to people all the time. The first is like, if you really want to um make an impact in the city or in your neighborhood, like, you need to pursue the people that the city and neighborhood works hard to avoid. Like, you just need to listen to them, get to know them. I mean, there's a lady who lives on my street who's in her 90s. She's lived in that house for 70 years. Like her parents bought it, and now her daughter and grandkids live with her. I mean, there's just like, you can tell like she's the person the neighborhood avoids, and yet she has like such a helpful perspective on Kennedy King and the changes that are happening and how they've experienced those things. Um, the other thing is, I tell people, like, some people like I help people move into, like, I have a lot of clients who are like, I want to move into a neighborhood that is, um, you know, going through a lot of transitions that I can be a part of, like, in a helpful way. Um, but I tell people also, like, the neighborhood you're entering into isn't like a blank slate that you can do whatever you want to. Like, it has a history, a past, it has a culture, and it has its own set of like hope for the future. So, like, you are the one entering into that. You're not the one solving like creating, like, being the neighborhood savior. So those two things I feel like frame up a lot of good conversations with people and kind of help set their expectations for approaching things the right way. Um, yeah, it's just complicated.
Yeah, I agree. Silva, same question for you. How do you talk to your clients about this?
I haven't had as many clients as Phil, so I have less experience to draw on. But I think when I talk to like residents who are moving here, and looking at different neighborhoods, the same kind of idea of that there are here people who are here first, whose story you need to hear, and kind of asking yourself like, who's not at the table. If you're having a discussion or making a decision, you shouldn't just look at who's there, you should ask who's not here, um, and understand why. So one thing, like for us in our neighborhood association, is that switching from a Saturday morning meeting in person to a virtual evening meeting means that people who have childcare, like they have kids and are single moms, they can participate because they don't have to get a babysitter to be part of the conversation about what's happening in the neighborhood and what we want to work on and do together. And I think that that's changed how the conversations have gone because of who gets to be part of it. So paying attention to those kind of things as you're making decisions and moving in the world, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, that's so good. Thanks. Okay, the last question I have for you before we open it up is, I guess, outside of your clients, is there anything within your own real estate practice that you try to carry with you in order to be more considerate towards neighborhoods or neighbors, that you think other realtors should know? Or another way to ask that is, any advice that you would give to realtors as they kind of move throughout their career? Silva, I'm going to start with you again.
I would love it if every realtor in Indianapolis would like set hard lines with their like out of state investors. Like, okay, you can buy this property and you'll probably make money on it, but I want you to know that like if you're going to buy and hold, you better take really good care of it while you're buying and holding. Like, you're not going to hold this property while it increases in value and hurts the properties around it by being an uncared for blight. Like, we're just drawing that line. Like in Indianapolis, we take care of our city first and our investor clients second. Like, I think that would be really cool to see. just across the board, like us drawing a line in the sand, and kind of schooling them a little instead of being like, oh, like you have money and you want to put it here and give some to me, like yay. Um, it's not, I mean, I know I'm making gross misrepresentations here, but yeah.
No, Selma, I would love if that was the case as well. Phil, what you got?
I would say we just need to be really careful with some of the terminology we use, and when we use words to really like clearly define them. Words that have like very positive or can have very positive meanings, like revitalization, redevelopment, like even placemaking or gentrification, like all those words for a lot of people it triggers something that we may not be aware of. So contextualizing those words is really important. I remember, gosh, this was probably like 4 years ago, but going to a like next gen my board maybe it wasn't next gen.
Phil, you're freezing.
Making. Oh no, am I back?
You're back.
Okay. Oh, so I went to my board meeting, and and it was about place making, and it was like what I thought was like this amazing meeting of like, what is placemaking, da 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 da, and all these things. And like at the end, this realtor stood up who was in her 60s, African American woman, just was like, I feel like you ignored my people. Like this whole conversation was about what do white people want in their places. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, it was, what I thought was a good meeting was like, oh my gosh, like we've just kind of ignored, like this whole meeting was about like, what are the hopes and dreams of like the things we like majority culture wants to see happen. And it's like all these neighborhoods and developments and things we're talking about have people who've lived there literally for 4 generations. It's like, you know, so anyway, I just think we have to be careful with the words and really kind of like define them. And then I think the other advice I would give is like, um, I don't know, I'm kind of like chewing on like the principle of like, I don't know, I'm trying to think like the best predictor of success and progress in certain things isn't so much about me like pursuing the highest level of influence. Like the best predictor of success in my business or progress or spheres of influence I already have. So like if I want to see change happen, I'm not going to call Governor Holcomb around me. Now, obviously, like, I'm not
You're cutting out.
saying, like
bad, Phil.
there are some things where, like hey, we need to call our senators. We need to like, petition against this. Some things. Okay, here. Did that help? Bummer. You still can't hear me. Oh, bummer.
We can hear a little bit. I think you're
Kind
good
of. Okay. Anyway, there's obviously some things where we do need to like pursue high levels of influence to like see change happen. Like there are some things where it's like call your senator, blah blah blah. But I think people underestimate the value of like getting to know your neighbors. So that's all I got.
Yeah, I studied sociology in college, which is like pretty much 100% about gentrification. Well, my concentration was in urban studies, so I think I had a lot of questions about that when I decided to take a job here, and I think this was a very long conversation, so I'm simplifying it down to like one sentence. But I remember Mark telling me that. So he was like, if you're concerned about gentrification, how well are you trying to get to know your neighbors? And again, that's, you know, part of like an hour-long conversation that we had. So I'm simplifying that down, but I think, Phil, what you're saying is true. Like, we should know our neighbors. Like it's easier to like want to push for development or just to, you know, say gentrification is wrong or whatever, but like how are you actually interacting with your neighborhood? How are you engaging with your neighbors? Like that's really important for you to actually understand the story and then make decisions in an informed way. So okay, I'm going to remove the spotlights from all of us, and then opening it up to the whole group. I guess I would love to know, for those of you that are on the call, like, do you have any experience in this? What was your experience like when you moved into your neighborhood? Or have you seen any of this? Does this ring a bell? Yeah, I would love to hear your story. Joel, not to pick on you, but I would specifically love to know your experience just because I feel like you might have a story to tell.
Do you mind repeating the question? Liz Shackleton was like messaging me right when you asked that
Yeah.
about a transaction.
Yeah, no worries. I guess I would just love to know, like, what was your experience? I mean, I think you actually grew up on the east side, but like, or in Indianapolis, but like maybe what has your experience been like moving into neighborhoods and maybe like how you interact with current and past residents and like how you see change happen in neighborhoods. Not
Yeah,
as well defined.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so east side, to define that, I lived like it's kind of interesting. Like I don't really think about upbringing until like I get asked questions like this, and it's like, oh, until I was 7, we were like the only white family in our whole neighborhood. Like 20, like right across from what was Naval Avionics, 21st and Arlington, essentially. That's where we grew up, and I mean, this is random detail to add, but we sold our house at 7 and moved to 16th and Post right across from Warren Central, and sold that house for $40,000, and that was top of market. And the realtor said we wouldn't get over like low 30s. And it was like kind of crazy looking back at that now that I'm a realtor and like connecting certain dots and just realizing like, like growing up, there's things you don't see when you grow up and it just becomes normal. So then like growing up at Warren Central, there was like, it was just, all I knew about like some of these kind of generational or I almost feel like racial experiences within neighborhoods kind of came from, like Warren Central is like a football powerhouse, and we'd always get comments like Ben Davis was a rival, and then Carmel was like a big rival almost in every sport on the men's side. But I mean, we had friends up in Carmel, and like we were always asked, like there's always questions or like confusion about us or like our friend group, and it was like, wait, you go to Warren, isn't that? And then there'd be like these really like gross comments that just came out of like assumptions or stereotypes from not being around that and just seeing our football team. And it was like, so it's like dealing with those kind of things. Like, I don't even know that I could put words to that until I got into college and maybe even just beyond, to what those experiences were and what was like really going on there. But since moving back to Indy, I've been in Mapleton, Fall Creek, and St. Clair Place. Actually initially was in Heron Morton, and my wife grew up in Heron Morton 20 years ago. Interesting enough, and like there were crack houses next door to her, and so it was like, I mean, just kind of those experiences. Like I don't have like an easy like this is how the neighborhood changes and this is how you bring like lasting transformation, but It's like just where we're positioned in St. Clair Place, across the street is like a neighbor that's been there 20 years that only speaks Spanish, first generation Spanish speaker. The neighbor to the right of them is like our vice president of neighborhood association. The neighbor to our right's been there for like 8 years. Neighbor across the street from that's been there for 30, and it's kind of like a staple in the neighborhood. And then the house immediately to our left is one of Bonner Center's like temporary housing initiatives. And so like I feel like we're surrounded by so many differences, like age, like financial demographic, ethnicity, to where it's like we love that, but I don't know, like other than just like engaging relationally and going and saying hey and having conversations, and like I mean I feel like in some ways it's as simple as that. Like I love what Silva said about like walking with people through change. So I could, if anything, I could probably learn from some of you to get more involved with some very practical things that are beyond just hanging out. So
Oh, that's so good, Joel. Thanks for sharing.
sorry, that was long-winded.
No, I loved it. Yeah, anyone else have anything that they want to add about their own experience or advice that they've run into, or things that would be helpful for other agents to hear?
I guess I kind of wanted to bring up one thing that hadn't really been on my radar before moving to Ransom Place was the issue of property taxes increasing for those on fixed income, which we have a lot of people on various kinds of fixed income in my neighborhood, whether disability or pension or otherwise. And one of the first neighborhood association meetings I went to, I got to meet VOP, and he spent half an hour giving a really beautiful, cogent explanation of how to navigate the complexities of that they had a plan to ensure that property taxes didn't increase for those who have been like the anchors of a neighborhood, who stayed when everyone else left, who have been like the remaining people with eyes on the street and caring about a place over the long term. And I think that that's something that we, as realtors who are very engaged in this process and part of the complex forces that create these situations where people's tax bills are beyond like 3 times what their mortgage is or 3 times their monthly income, to help make sure that we protect those people who are there first. I feel like it's almost a no-brainer to support what VOP has put together and to help be like the push to get that passed through the legislature. So I think that's another area where we can care and care for our neighbors. I think that these things do get complex and messy, and we live in a world where there's so many different competing parts. And if we're taking the time to figure out 1031 exchanges, like we should also be willing to wade into the complexities of how do we help our neighbors navigate all the complex parts of modern life, and the way that you have to know ahead of time to file your homestead exemption, and like caring about that for our neighbors, I think is a worthwhile cause. I think it's easy to just be like, it's complicated and throw your hands up, but like, I think we're called to press into the complex areas. Another thought for the road.
So
Rosie, I was going to add something within just specifically working with investors. So I work about 30% of my business is investors, and that can be buy and hold, buy and flip. That's generally, I mean, and it's a good chunk of steady year, like month in, month out, all year long business. Mm-hmm. And there's been like a few rude awakenings along the way. Like I think year 1 or like first 6 months, like I was taking some out of state investor phone calls, or was connecting with people who were flying here from New York, and was having these engagements, and they were like so distasteful to me that, and then there's like one engagement recently with, I hadn't done anything, didn't really know much about wholesaling and how that practically worked. I randomly got engaged with someone I didn't realize was a wholesaler and had to learn like, oh, I don't like anything that this is about. As far as representing this, I don't feel like I can do this ethically, fairly, or like responsibly. So like I made just some personal like convictions and boundaries within my investor business to where I don't work with any out of state investors unless I know them. And what I've found is like by working with local investors only, like I got a guy specifically who's like been in Meridian Kessler for a long time. And his like as Meridian Kessler like grew and developed, like he couldn't buy there anymore. And it like started trickling into Mapleton Fall Creek. Well, he started investing there. But he was acquiring these properties that had long-term tenants and has been really awesome about like engaging with them, keeping them, retaining them, working with their scenarios. Like it's not like I acquire the property and you're getting a 60-day notice. You know what I mean? Like, and he's ultimately, he is trying to retire and use this for retirement, but it's also like there's a responsibility and a community care that goes along with that. And I think it's been really rewarding as a realtor, prioritizing that and working with that, and then seeing those engagements, how they're different with the tenants, especially during acquisition, or especially from like coming into like a slumlord situation and converting that under new ownership, and just like the care and attentiveness that, man, like these are people and they often don't know their rights. And most of my investors are coming in during inspection, like notifying the tenant, hey, these are your rights. Even if I don't buy this property, like I just want you to be aware. And like I'll have like local investors go print off the tenant rights sheet, give it to them, whether they buy the property or not. And it's just like this general care that I think goes a long way. It makes me feel a whole lot better about doing that kind of business, especially with low inventory.
Man, Joel, I love that so much. Printing off tenant rights and giving it to tenants when you were working with investors.
Oh, I got some bulldogs who are looking to slap into slumlords all day. So watch out.
Oh, that's so good.
I love it so much. That's what makes me really proud to be part of the Platt family, is like knowing that like if that kind of attitude and those kind of boundaries that you're setting, if those grow and everyone else adopts them, we will have such a different city. And we will like being able to care for neighbors in such a broad way by all of us saying like, we're going to commit to like integrity in this area over potential income. I love that, Joel. I love that so much.
Oh, what a good group we've got. Guys, I am going to go ahead and wrap us up for the day. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this is one in a series of conversations that we talk about this, because I think it's really important that we think about how do we be good neighbors, how do we be good citizens of Indianapolis, and how do we use our businesses kind of as a platform for that. So thank you for being here. Hope you can join us tomorrow with Crystal White on negotiations. Have a good one, guys.